Good evening, everyone. Before us, we are about to encounter paranormal tales, each one more terrifying than the last. Please, get comfortable and prepare yourselves, for what is about to unfold will challenge even the most skeptical. We are about to cross a lonely road, a desolate path that leads us directly into the unknown and the inexplicable. First stop, the apartment. Greetings from Tampico, Tamaulipas. I wrote this account a few months ago, but I still get chills whenever I think about what I experienced. It's hard not to question what really happened that night. We tend to believe that these scary things are just stories, always far from our reality, something that could never happen in an ordinary neighborhood. But I was wrong. We all were. The supernatural does not choose a date, place, or time. 2 years ago, I moved into the condominium where I currently reside. It is an area consisting exclusively of buildings. Although the condominium is small in size, the population density is high due to the apartments. There are 5 streets and about 5 blocks. The buildings start at number 500 and go up to 912. So despite being compact, it is quite inhabited. The rental rates here are affordable, but due to circumstances beyond our control, we have lived in 3 different apartments. We are currently in one on the 3rd floor. Exactly 1 year ago, we were moving from a 1st floor apartment to one on the 3rd. The move was done by me, my husband, and a friend of his, and we finished around 2 in the morning. The first day in this new home was exhausting, as we needed to renovate and reorganize everything once again. I decided to put my children to bed early and took advantage of the late hours to tidy up the house. Something I didn't mention earlier is that I have 2 children. My baby was only 1 month old, and my older daughter was 3 years old. The first strange event occurred one of those nights when I decided to keep arranging the house. While my baby slept with my husband and my daughter was in her room, I was washing the dishes. At one point I had to stop because I thought I heard my baby crying as if waking up. He was a newborn and woke up often to breastfeed. I didn't hear anything else after that moment, so I assumed it was my imagination and continued with what I was doing. A few minutes later, the crying started for real. I hurried to rinse my hands to pick him up, but before I could, I heard a peculiar sound. It was a soft shh, like the one mothers or grandmothers make to calm a baby. I immediately thought it was my husband, as he was in the same room as the baby. The curious thing was that the little one stopped crying. I finished the task in the kitchen, thinking everything was under control. When the crying returned, accompanied by the same soothing sound, I decided to quickly finish washing my hands and went to my son's room to pick him up. My husband, who was working 2 jobs at the time and needed rest, was deeply asleep. I tried to move him, but he was so exhausted that neither the baby's crying nor my movements were enough to wake him. I picked up my son, breastfed him, and decided to stop the cleaning for that night. I preferred to lie down and rest. However, this was not the only strange event I experienced. Something very similar also happened with my daughter when she was younger. A few days later, another unsettling incident occurred, this time involving my daughter. That night, I decided to put her to sleep in her room. She was starting to get used to sleeping alone, so we opted to leave the mattress on the floor for safety. My daughter had many stuffed animals, which I had carefully arranged in a corner of the room, lined up from the smallest to the largest. That same night, my husband went to bed early, and I stayed with my daughter until she fell asleep. When my baby started crying, remembering the previous occurrence, I didn't want to leave him waiting and ran to get him. I returned to my daughter's room and sat on the mattress, leaning my back against the wall. While I was feeding my son, I looked at my phone. It was 12:42 a.m. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, I saw that the clock read 1:10 a.m. More than 20 minutes had passed. I looked at my daughter, and she had already fallen asleep. I picked up the phone, ready to lie down with my husband, but I remembered that before dozing off, I was feeding the baby. I didn't see him on the mattress, so I assumed that my husband, seeing me asleep, had taken the baby to the crib. I went to our room and felt an emptiness in my stomach when I realized the baby wasn't there. I ran back to my daughter's room and found him lying among the stuffed animals. I didn't want to think about it any longer. I picked up the baby, took him to the crib, and put my daughter to sleep with us in the bed. I decided to reflect on the event the next day. In the morning, I analyzed the situation. It made no sense for my baby to be among the toys, as there was a distance of about 1.5 meters between us. I sat on the bed and considered the possibilities. If the baby had fallen from my arms, he would have been close to me, not so far away. I examined him carefully, gently pressing his head to see if there were any signs of pain or injury, but there were no marks, bruises, or any indication that he had been hurt. To this day, I cannot find a plausible explanation for what happened. A year has passed since those events, and now I feel it's time to share my experience. It all happened exactly around this time, and the memory still haunts me. The fear that whatever was lurking in the apartment, something that seemed focused on my baby, may return, never leaves me. I am grateful for allowing me to share this story. Second stage, the Walled Up. The 1985 earthquake that struck Mexico City was a turning point. At that time, my father worked at a small snack bar located on Reforma, near the Revolucion metro station. Many buildings sustained severe damage or even collapsed. The place where my father was employed didn't escape unscathed. The bodega, located on the upper floor, was the most affected. After 2 months of assessments and checks regarding the risk of demolition of the building, it was decided that the damages would be repaired. Since my father had worked there for years, he was one of the first to return, being tasked with overseeing the repair work. He arrived early, and soon the work began. He told us that the workers in charge of the job were 2 masons. When they started the process of tearing down a cracked wall, the sound of the hammers echoed, but suddenly the pounding stopped. One of the masons ran down, visibly frightened, and shouted to my father, "Come up!" Upon reaching the location, my father found part of the wall knocked down, and there, amidst the rubble, were 3 bodies walled up, arranged in a line as though waiting for something. It was impossible to ignore that they were skeletons. They appeared to be men, based on the remnants of their clothing. Without wasting time, my father called the owner of the building, who arrived quickly. Without delay, the owner instructed my father and the masons to leave. 15 days later, he returned to work, as if nothing had happened. When my father went back to the bodega, he noticed that the wall had already been repaired and painted, as if nothing had occurred. Everything was in place, and the work resumed normally. As the day passed, people began to return to their routines, trying to move on with their lives after the earthquake. It was at that point that a friend of my father's showed up, and time passed quickly as they talked about the tremor and the damage it had caused. When my father realized night had already fallen, and he still needed to go up to the bodega to leave some items that would be used the next day. Upon reaching the bodega, he saw a man standing at the entrance. When the stranger noticed that my father had seen him, he hid behind the door. My father thought it might be a thief trying to take advantage of the distraction. Since the bathroom was next to the bodega, he assumed the man could have snuck in while they were talking. He quickly went down and called another friend, the owner of a pharmacy, to accompany him. The 3 of them went up again, and the scene repeated itself. The man was at the door, observed them, and once again hid behind it. They ascended cautiously, and when they checked behind the door, there was no one. It was then that the pharmacy owner, with a shaken voice, exclaimed, "There are 3!" And indeed, 3 men were at the back of the bodega, hidden behind a pile of objects. They hurriedly went back down and called the police. When the officers arrived, they listened to the report. One of the policemen, with a serious expression, asked my father, "Did you by chance find people walled up in the walls?" My father, surprised, thought that the owner of the building had informed the police about what had been found months earlier. But before he could respond, the pharmacy owner intervened and calmly said, "No, we haven't seen anything like that here." After the police left, the pharmacy owner revealed something unsettling. He shared that in other places they had found people inside the walls, but these locations were being sealed, and for now, no one knew exactly what had been discovered. He also mentioned to my father that, at the pharmacy itself, they had made the same discovery: bodies walled up in the wall of the storeroom. It wasn't just men, but also women and even children. However, out of fear of the possible consequences, he chose to remain silent. He then decided what might have seemed like a practical solution at the time. He had the remains of the victims sent off with the trucks that were still collecting rubble from the collapsed buildings. The debris, so to speak, was going to be taken to other places where new buildings and houses would be constructed. My father always said that since then he would hear footsteps and voices coming from the bodega. Sometimes he saw 3 figures standing at the back, near the cabinets. On other occasions, he would hear the sound of someone descending the stairs, or even the noise of coins falling and rolling on the floor. To this day, we don't know exactly what those men were doing there. However, as an old urban legend goes, there is something strange about the fact that for some reason it's not uncommon to find bodies walled up in old buildings. So if they weren't there since the construction of the place where you live, it's quite possible that you're not alone. A warning to all who travel these paths. Greetings and safe travels to all. 3rd stage, red hot. Good evening, driver. It's been a while since I've been traveling along this desolate road, and I feel compelled to share one of the many stories I carry with me. The last tale about haunted houses reminded me of a dreadful memory from my childhood, something specific that has haunted me ever since. I remember that as a child, I used to wake up in the middle of the night. At times I still can't fully understand. I believe it was the early hours of the morning, as everyone else was deeply asleep. I used to cover myself completely with the blankets because fear would consume me, especially due to some terrifying events I had already experienced. On that particular night, I was alone in my bed, as my younger brother had gone to sleep at my cousin's house. I remember that my father hadn't yet arrived home. He had said he would be late. Only my mother and my older brother were in the house, sharing the same room with me. The 2 of us slept in a bunk bed. That night, something woke me up. It was breathing, a harsh sound, as if someone was breathing only through their mouth, rapidly and intermittently. I could feel and hear it very close to me, which filled me with immense fear. I tried to hide even more under the covers, desperate, attempting to call my mother. My voice was shaky, almost inaudible due to the panic. I remembered the words of my grandparents, who had taught us to pray the Lord's Prayer 4 times when fear haunted us. I began to pray, but as I spoke the words, that cursed breathing became more intense, and I felt it getting closer and closer to me. The bed seemed to shift, as if something was adjusting, preparing to come even nearer. The breathing didn't stop, and now it was even closer. I thought to myself, this is too much. It must be some kind of prank. Thinking of my older brother, I decided to pull the blanket off to see what was breathing on me in such a sinister way. What I saw was a gaunt creature with reddish skin, almost like it was on fire, and its eyes were enormous, as if burning. Its hands were long with grotesque fingers and nails, and they were reaching out toward my face. I couldn't hold back the scream of terror that escaped from me, and it woke my mother and brother. My mother rushed to the light and turned it on, asking why I had screamed. Still trembling, I told her what had happened. Soon my grandparents arrived, also awakened by my scream. I explained to them what I had seen, and my grandfather, with his habit of sprinkling holy water, began performing a ritual throughout the house. But I won't lie, driver and passengers, I clearly saw the face of that filthy being and the way it formed a cruel smile. Over time, my father passed away in 2020, but after the prayers, he still stayed a bit with the family. On one of those occasions, we discussed the scares, and my cousin shared his own terrifying story, which had occurred in the same house where he lived with my uncles and grandparents. He told us that he had been frightened in the kitchen when he heard someone knocking on the window that led to the patio during the night. When he turned to see what it was, he described exactly what I had seen. The red being, with the appearance of an old man, its eyes fixed and piercing. And as terrifying as it was, I knew that at some point I too would have to face that creature. I still wonder what that creature was that inhabited our house, especially since we could also hear the sound of boots, those with spurs, knocking 4 times on the wooden door of my grandparents' room. I believe this will remain a mystery. 4th stop, the shadow of the Gaisach. Hello, I'd prefer to remain anonymous. The truth is, I don't even know where to begin with this story. It's something that few people would believe. I come from a small ranch called San Jose. This place is part of the municipality of Beta Grande in Zacatecas. They say it's a village marked by tales of witchcraft, terror, and mystery. And it is here, at my grandfather's house, that my story unfolds. At the ranch, families often own almost an entire block, and it's a tradition to divide the land among the children, as is customary here. This event happened 13 years ago, during the Panuco festivities. It is common to take a walk from the ranch to the neighboring town. I remember that, on that occasion, it was the first time I was going to make this journey. My grandfather's house has a large fenced area, which is tightly closed to ensure no one enters during the night. One of those nights, my mother asked me to get my brother's sandals from the truck, as he had left them there. I left the house and started walking. Soon I felt something strange in the air, an unusual sensation as I followed the path. I grabbed what I was asked to get, but noticed a human silhouette in the distance. However, I couldn't distinguish its face or what it was wearing. It was just a dark shadow. When the figure realized I was there, it made that typical hand gesture, beckoning me to come closer. A terrifying fear gripped me, and in panic, I ran back to the room where my parents were. After some time talking and trying to calm me down, I gathered the courage to check if the shadow was still there, perhaps just a figment of my imagination, created by the darkness of the night. When I reached the edge of the fence, I saw that there was no one, but a strange sensation returned to overwhelm me, a growing fear. Then, in the distance, under an old, large and gloomy Gaisach tree, I saw the same shadow, pointing to the ground as if it wanted me to look for something there. Terror gripped me again, and I ran back to the house. I explained everything to my parents, and surprised, they went out to investigate, thinking maybe it was just a prank. However, what they found was only ashes on the ground. They told the story to my uncles and my grandfather, and everyone was shocked by what had happened. They scolded me for not going immediately, suggesting that the most likely thing was there was treasure to be found. Still frightened, I responded that if that was the case, why didn't they investigate it themselves? After all, who was just a simple boy to deal with something so grand? Besides, who could guarantee that it was really a treasure? It could very well have been the body of the shadowy figure buried right there. My cousins, curious about what had happened, asked me where exactly the shadow had pointed. I showed them the spot, and in the following days, one of them decided to dig. To his shock, he found a small jar filled with charcoal. He continued digging, and what he uncovered was a macabre skeleton, still dressed in the clothes of the person who had died there. Terrified, he ran to my uncles and grandfather, and after hearing the account, they called the police, who started an investigation. During the investigation, it was discovered that the bones dated back to the time of the conquest of Zacatecas, and the cause of death appeared to be a gunshot wound. It is believed that the deceased had been buried near where their remains were found. In my family, so many strange things have happened, but something similar only occurred with two of my other cousins. Only one of them had the courage to investigate when the shadow beckoned him. What he found were 3 silver coins, which are now kept by my grandfather. He believes they may be cursed, and that, over time, it may be necessary to return them to the place where they came from to avoid bringing trouble to the family. My ranch is a place full of macabre stories, from the sound of a horse pulling a ghostly cart, to the Llorona, to a lake where children lost their lives and whose cries can still be heard at night. There are so many inexplicable stories that it's impossible not to feel a constant sense of mystery hanging in the air.